All right, guys, this is the big one, the C Fund, aka the Millionaire Maker. Let's get into it. Welcome back, Furzonians, to another episode of whatever this is. I'm Chris Barfield of barfieldfinancial.com. I am a CPA, I'm a FERS expert, I'm a multimillionaire, and I am a recovering federal agent. Today we're going to dissect the C Fund. Before we get into that, please like and subscribe, but most importantly, share this information, particularly with younger employees. I hear this all the time. I really wish I would have had this information, Chris, when I was younger. Yeah, me too. So take it on yourself to be that person that we wish we had when we first were hired. These videos are not so much for us older people. They're really for the younger people to help them have a shorter learning curve, if you will. They shouldn't have to learn by trial and error. If they could get this information at a younger age, just imagine the difference it would have made in your life. So that's what can happen to them. So please share it with the younger people. Thanks. The C Fund is the second oldest fund inside the TSP. It came out in January of 1988. Since then, it has averaged 11% a year. Phenomenal returns. That includes even crashes. We've had multiple crashes since 1988. Still averaged 11%. Over the last 10 years, it's averaged about 12%. And this year, as I record this in August of 2024, it's up about 18% so far this year. So fantastic, phenomenal returns from the C Fund. Has beaten any other fund inside the TSP over those, well, any number of those periods, but certainly over the long run. The stock market as a whole has, depending on what metric you use and what index or what measurement, has averaged roughly around 8% over the real long term. We're talking 100 years or so, depending again on what metric you use. So the C Fund is doing better than the long-term average by quite a bit. So if you're one of those people that think that we'll revert to the mean, we'll go back to an average of 8%, and we've been averaging far above that, that means by default then we should have some down years sometime in the future. I'm not predicting anything. I have no clue what the market's going to do. Neither do you, neither do the experts. But I'm just saying, if we're averaging 8% over the long term, there has to be some down years in the future. So when you invest in the C Fund, what exactly are you investing in? Where's your money going? What are you purchasing? Well, the C Fund is another index. We talked about index in the last video for the F Fund, but an index is just a group, a basket of investments, in this case stocks, and the index that the C Fund is based upon is the Standard & Poor's 500 index, often just shorted to S&P 500. So when you buy the C Fund or you invest your money into the C Fund, you are investing into the S&P 500. Okay, great. What exactly is the S&P 500? Well, this is a bit of an oversimplification, so it's not exactly like this for you investment nerds out there that know the difference. Just bear with me. But at the risk of oversimplification, the S&P 500 is the 500 largest, biggest, most established leading companies that are publicly traded in the United States. So think about number 1 down to 500. That would be the S&P 500. It doesn't work exactly like that. Okay, so bear with me. But for our purposes, it's good enough. 1 to 500 largest companies. These would be companies that you guys would know. Here are the top 10 holdings inside the S&P 500 or inside the C Fund. This is straight off of tsp.gov. The top 10, again, names you would all recognize: Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Nvidia, Google, Facebook, Chase, those types of companies. These are large, very well-established companies. These are companies that are not extremely volatile. You wouldn't expect one of these companies to just disappear overnight. Apple Computer might go out of business one day. but it's not going to go out of business this year or next year or even the year after. With the resources that they have and the size that they are, it's just not going to be something that's going to just disappear. Okay, these are not startup companies. These are more established companies. This comes into play later on when you're trying to figure out exactly what you want to invest in, what your investment strategy is. Do you want more risk and potentially more return? Are you happy with being a little bit more conservative and just taking gains, but not being super risky with your investments? That would be the C fund. The C fund gets a risk score on a 1 to 5, right in the middle at 3. So it's a 3 out of 5. So that leads me right into my next point. Who is the C fund for? Well, to a certain extent, I'd argue it's for everyone, because I think everyone needs to be at least somewhat invested in the market, in equities. If you are a younger person, you're starting your career, you're in your 20s and 30s, I would argue that you could be probably 100% in the C fund. Would that cause a roller coaster, a bit of a roller coaster? If there were crashes, sure. You'd have some ups and downs, but in your 20s and 30s, does it really matter? Do you care if there's a market crash that takes 5 or even 10 years to recover? Not really. We're going to talk about at the end, we're going to talk about my experience with TSP Millionaires. The C fund factors heavily into why they are TSP Millionaires. So the C fund is for anybody that wants to continue to increase their investment holdings, increase their returns. This is going to be, in theory, at least in the past, this is going to far exceed the G fund. Okay, the G fund, remember, 1 out of 5 on the risk scale, guaranteed not to lose money, but also guaranteed not to make a ton of money. So that's going to be something that's going to factor in later in your career. G fund's not going to be factoring in, or probably shouldn't be factoring in early in your career. That's going to be where you're mostly C fund. However, when you get to your 40s, 50s, 60s, would you be 100% in the C fund? For example, I said earlier in the beginning of the video, 11%. If that's the best fund, why don't I just stay in there forever? Well, because there's such a thing as a 2000 and a 2008 and a 2020, in which case, in each one of those cases, you had the C fund drop in 30% or more. So that is not a huge deal if you're 30 years old. If you're 60 years old and you're getting ready to use your money and your $1 million turns into $700,000, that's going to be a lot of stress that happens right at retirement. So it may not be the wisest thing. By the same token, some of you are nearing retirement in your 50s and you tell me, well, I got rid of all of my stocks. I got rid of all the C and the S and I went straight into the G 100% because I'm getting ready to retire. Probably not wise either, because even at 50, I would argue that you are still a long-term investor. This money has to last you 10, 20, 30, maybe 40 years in this environment. Okay, so you may be finishing your government career. You may be getting to the end of your government career, but you may be literally in the middle of your investment career. So the C fund probably would factor into, at least somewhat, into everyone's portfolio. But talk to your favorite financial professional and see what's best for you guys. I'm not giving you any advice. I'm just telling you it's not something that's super risky, and it probably does need to be at least somewhat in your portfolio if you're expecting your money to last for decades. You want more, probably. You want more than just the 3 or 4% that the G fund's going to return over the long term. Okay, so what if you want to duplicate the C fund outside of the TSP? Is that possible? Like in a brokerage account or something? Absolutely. In fact, it is the most common index fund available out there. Most people today, when we talk about the market, when we talk about the stock market, that's really what we're referring to. When people say the market is down or the market is up, Generally speaking, we're talking about the S&P 500. It's that common of an index. So if you want to duplicate it in the private sector, you can do it at just about any mutual fund company there is. Here are a few of the most common ones. At Vanguard, you're looking for ticker symbol VFIAX. At Schwab, you're looking for the ticker symbol SWPPX. Again, you can see right here in the name, S&P 500 Index. Fidelity has one as well, FXAIX. Again, if you are using American funds or T. Rowe Price or whatever you're using, you're looking for something that's going to replicate the S&P 500 Index, which again is super common. Oftentimes people tell me, Chris, why would I want to move my money out of the TSP? The TSP has the lowest fees out there. Unfortunately, that is simply not true, and it hasn't been true for a very long time. But the myth or the rumor, the belief persists. Let's look at it exactly. Don't take my word for it. Let's dive into it and see exactly what the numbers are. So here we have in TSP.gov, we have the C fund. You can go to TSP.gov, click on the individual funds, pull up C fund. Let's come down here and look at the expense ratio for the C fund. 0.048%. All right, 4.8 basis points. Not very high, but certainly not lower than the private sector. Let's go to Vanguard. So remember, 0.048. What is Vanguard? Well, Vanguard beats it, not by much, but it does beat it. 0.04. That's the VFIAX, as I showed you earlier. 0.04. Schwab, what do we got at Schwab? This is the SWPPX. Come over here, 0.02. So a little bit less than half of the TSP C fund fee. Let's go over to Fidelity. Fidelity, we have to scroll down a little bit here and we will see the net fees, 0.015, less than a third of what TSP has at, again, 0.048. So while it is true that the TSP fees are not necessarily expensive, it is not true that they are cheaper than the private sector. In most cases, they are not. And the same holds true for S Fund and some of the other ones, which we'll talk about in the future. Okay, as I promised, I will talk about my experience with TSP Millionaires. I am fortunate enough to get to speak to about 2 to 3 TSP Millionaires a week, every single week. I've probably spoken to 300 or 400 TSP Millionaires over the last couple of years. That provides me some very unique insight into and perspective into exactly what they did. How does somebody become a TSP Millionaire? Well, it's really not as complicated as many people think. A lot of people will tell me, I just don't know much about finances. These guys, I just don't know when to time the market. I don't know when to move my money. The elections are coming. Should I move some money out of the market until the market stabilizes? And they have this concept in their mind that in order to make a lot of money in the TSP, you have to understand the movement of markets, and you've got to make the decision at just the right time of when to invest in what. That could not be farther from the truth. In fact, it's the exact opposite. You have the ability to move money around inside the TSP from fund to fund. You have that ability. You're limited to a couple of times a month, but you have that ability. A lot of people are out there adhering to some of these allocation services, which I am totally against. I cannot stand them. They are costing you money. So people will follow these things or come up with their own system to move money around, trying to avoid the crashes and then catch the rides up. And so they make a lot of money. That's the goal. The TSP millionaires that I speak to, none of them did any of that. None of them. By far, the most common thing that they did was put it in the C fund and not touch it. The largest balances that I see, and when I talk about a large balance, I'm talking about 1.5, 1.7, 2 million, 2.5 million. Those large balances that I routinely encounter, I ask these people, I ask each one of them, how'd you do it? How'd you get there? What was your strategy? You know what every single one of them tells me? The largest balances have the least number of transfers. By transfer, I mean moving the money around. The highest balances have the least amount of movement in there. They put it in the C fund when they came on. They didn't touch it. They rode out the crashes, 2008, 2000 to 2002, COVID in 2020. The people that rode those out and just stuck with it are the ones that captured the 11% average a year or 12% or whatever it is over their time period. The largest balances, I think it bears repeating, the largest balances have the least amount of transfers. Many of the really large balances have zero, none. They didn't move the money around. In contrast, I have never found someone that has a really large balance that moved their money around or followed any type of allocation service or was constantly, tinkering with it. It seems to be our human nature that we can't leave things alone, particularly our investments. We want to go in there and try to invest harder or work or mess with something. And history has shown us that that doesn't do us any good. Over the long run, I swear I think the most expensive things that some of us own are our TSP passwords. Most of you would have more money had you been locked out of your account for 20 years. Okay, that's pretty much the C Fund in a nutshell. Feel free to research it on your own. TSP.gov's got a lot of good information on there. I think that site is underused. I think people do not get on there like they should. They have a lot of questions that are easily answered at TSP.gov. Go on there, check out your C Fund. If you want to replicate it in a particular brokerage account that I didn't mention today, just look for the S&P 500. Let me know in the comments. Give me some feedback. Do you like these videos? Are they helpful? What else should I be covering? We'll be back soon with the S and then the I fund. Hopefully the new I fund will be out. We'll be talking about the new I fund. Well, I'll talk about the new I fund anyway because the old one's going away. Other than that, take care of each other. Leave a comment in here. Give me some feedback. And don't forget, feed that C fund.